This is incredible evidence. This is prophecy. It is supernatural. We have evidence in the metaphysics or the supernatural. Metaphysics means beyond physics. Can this be explained by physics? No. There's other arguments out there about this theory, and they try to deny it, but they're all bunk arguments. We have proof that this is the truth. Jesus even challenged the Jews of his time. He said, "You should have known the day of my visitation." The Bible, this supernatural book, it wrote, you should have known. Jesus said, you should have known. Why should they have known? Well, because Daniel 9 told them when he'd be on the earth, and they should have known the day of his visitation. Jesus is making a scientific claim. He says, look at the evidence, he's saying. It could be verified if you just looked at the evidence. If you were just students and true scientists, you would know that there's evidence that I did this supernatural thing. Well, they're probably thinking there's no supernatural anymore. That was back with the Jews and the seas parting and all this stuff, but not anymore. Or those were just folk stories too. They're probably thinking that, and they're missing the supernatural evidence that Jesus is offering, and it could be verified. In fact, the Bible never asks us to believe by blind faith. It says in Hebrews 11:1 that we have faith in the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. The Bible even says, be scientific about this stuff. And God's up to that challenge. No other book dares to attempt this because they're not from God. These other books about God don't do this. There's one book and one revelation, and the one book is autographed by the true God in doing something supernatural to his book, and he gave it the ability to predict the future. And the Bible alone does this, and it can be studied scientifically. The Bible alone sets itself apart by making this radical prediction that you can only explain by the supernatural, and then it fulfills it perfectly. That's how awesome our God is. This isn't a Nostradamus vague prophecy that's, a similar name. This is an emphatic date that can be verified by the evidence. The date's given in advance when the Messiah would be crucified, and we can bet on it. This is verifiable evidence using the scientific method. We have a book that claims to be written by God. We have a prediction hundreds of years in advance of several things that will emphatically happen. There is a Messiah, and he will die. It didn't say he'd die of old age. It said he'd be cut off. It even predicted a death of being cut off. This gives us a date, this prophecy. It tells us where, and it tells us why. To put an end to sin, to make end of sin, to pay reconciliation for mankind, because God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. This is something that can be studied with empirical evidence. And we have physical evidence in writing. We have a book. There's physical evidence. We have physical evidence that we can carbon date into the 2nd century BC, at least, that this was written before Christ was on earth. That's called empirical evidence. We have Ezekiel and Daniel and the entire history of the intertestamental period predicted, even the characters of Alexander the Great, and the characters are even predicted in there and written in advance, because we have copies, extants, textual extants, copies of these predictions that are dated before they happened. the rise and fall of these empires, and it was in perfect order. This is science, and we can verify the evidence. Evidence of something supernatural. There's a supernatural precondition to studying the first cause of being. And it's logical that the supernatural first cause of all things would reveal himself or communicate to his contingent being, mankind, this way, in his only special revelation to mankind, the Bible. I don't know why this isn't on the Discovery Channel or the Science Channel. But remember, God tells us the future before it happens in his book, and he says, I tell you before it happens so that you can know that I am he. How do we know the supernatural exists? Well, we can study it with empirical evidence and verify it. And God has always said in his Bible, he lives outside of time and space and eternity, and he has revealed himself to mankind in special revelation in the Bible, and he's put on the heart of every human being that there is a God. And we merely need to follow the evidence that we could say to any atheist, you should have known the day of the visitation of God, and he paid for your sins. I would ask anyone at the hearing of my voice that you would understand that God has laid out this evidence for us to be redeemed and sin be dealt with, because he's holy and perfect and sin won't be there, and that you would call on his name for forgiveness of sins. The supernatural does exist, and we're going to continue now to pile on some evidence of the supernatural as we've been beating down the evolutionary model. Now we're going to start to enter and quote the Bible, because the Bible has been the one all along that held to these sciences.